and kick off the slideshow, and we should be live now. Okay, excellent. Well, thanks everyone for joining. I'll go ahead and introduce myself quickly, and then we can go ahead and get into the content. So, hey, everyone, whether it's morning, evening, or afternoon, wherever you happen to be. My name's Evan Kading. I'm the Global Director of Solutions Engineering here at Supermetrics. I was really excited to be invited to speak at this SEO Square by Semji because SEO is a super important part of the growth stack for every modern brand. And we, of course, at Supermetrics have hundreds, if not thousands, of customers who actively use Supermetrics on a day-to-day basis for a variety of different SEO use cases, many of which I'm excited to discuss today. So let's go ahead and get into today's content. I think we can go ahead and begin. So when I start to talk about Supermetrics, what we do, how we can help brands, and what the trends that agencies are trying to adapt to today, we really identify three big mega trends. And now I know that Neil Patel earlier yesterday named 15 different trends that marketers should be aware of, but I'm going to focus on three today. So many of these may be familiar to you as well. Some of them might be new, but the different trends and challenges they propose are as follows. Number one is, as many of you know, brands across the globe are dealing with the fact that third-party cookies are going to be away. And from a holistic media measurement perspective, this is going to pose a number of challenges. Many of the tried and true tactics associated with paid media, associated with using things like DSPs or platform retargeting, or any variety of techniques that rely on third-party audience data, are subject to change and potentially significant degradation going forward. So given that that's the case, brands are looking for alternative ways to balance their measurement strategy across the surface of alternatives. Granted, it's actually super beneficial, I think, to be an SEO expert in this world because, well, fundamentally, there's not that much that changes from an SEO perspective. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. But just keep in mind, from an ecosystem perspective, there are other areas where this is becoming challenging for marketers and are probably giving rise to additional investment opportunities for those in the paid search or organic search side of the business. The other mega trend we'll talk about here is the rise of generative AI. And what does this actually mean for brands and agencies trying to leverage AI in their day-to-day workflows? Is it best to leverage AI to deliver products to consumers more quickly? Is it better to use it to accelerate internal processes? Is it better to use it to identify and scan your potential market for opportunities? Is it best for segmenting your audience or potentially identifying different patterns within your data? There's a variety of different use cases for generative AI, and I'm excited to talk about where we see some of the foundational elements being to help incorporate into your company's AI strategy. And lastly, we have regulatory uncertainty. If it's not one thing, it's the next, whether it's EU antitrust coming down and potentially bringing down a lot of the different tactics that are being used by Google, by Apple, by Meta. If it's the US Congress deciding whether or not it's going to ban TikTok, there's a lot of different areas where regulatory uncertainty is coming to the fore, not least in which how AI becomes regulated. For example, when we think about SEO, search engine optimization, and we think about AIO, AI optimization, right? Making sure that your content shows up in the results of these AI tools. The way that AI becomes regulated actually has a pretty big impact on how we produce and share our content. So the regulatory uncertainty makes things challenging, of course, if we're going to plan for the 1 to 3 year time horizon as well. So these are some of the big mega trends that we're seeing in the area, in the industry today. And what I'm going to talk about are measurement strategies that are relatively robust to these three different mega trends. I didn't go into this in the beginning, but you'll find that today's presentation is largely going to be about the measurement holistically of media and marketing investment plans, and how best you, from an organization-wide perspective, can ensure that the work that you're doing is contributing to the organization's bottom line, and best yet, how you can actually prove that as well, despite some of the trends that you might see today on your screen. So the brands we work with and the agencies who support them, they really want to know a couple of different things in light of these megatrends. How does brand investment influence things like downstream performance, right? If people are aware of their brand, how likely are they to come across it potentially organically? Right? Or follow accounts on social media and then be influenced by content further downstream. How much our revenue would have materialized without paid media support. This is something I see happening all the time between paid and organic teams, where paid teams want to claim credit for a conversion, but in reality, a lot of those conversions wouldn't necessarily have happened anyway without the support of a strong organic presence. We'll get into some different methods for how to account for that later as well. And then, of course, how do we mitigate our signal loss with first-party data? This is an element that probably falls outside of the realm of most SEO strategies, but it's important to keep in mind within the context of businesses that we operate in, the strategies that are relying historically on audience data that's based on third-party cookies are now having to shift to use first-party data. And if your business hasn't invested in a robust data capture, collection, and annotation system for your first-party data, a lot of those techniques can be challenging or have limited effectiveness at best, actually increasing the importance of having a strong organic presence across multiple different domains. So given that these are the questions, one of the things that we try to build out are frameworks for how brands can actually build a holistic measurement strategy. And I'm certainly not the person who came up with this. There are many thought leaders in the marketing measurement space that have essentially identified a triad of techniques where there's no one size fits all technique for measuring the effectiveness of your marketing activities, but in reality is a finely crafted balance between three different distinct areas of marketing measurement, some of which you may be familiar with, others of which might be new to you today in today's session. So let's go through those and what they are. Number one is what we would potentially historically classify as post-exposure measurement. This is really just a fancy way to say anything that a user did or saw after they interacted with a piece of content. Now, that content could be a web page that we've built that we have a conversion tracking pixel on. It could be a paid ad that they saw, whether it's on the open web or whether it's in a walled garden. Any way that we can track and trace the actions of a user to a specific piece of content that they interacted with, that's going to be an example of post-exposure measurement. The other pillar here is marketing mixed modeling. So marketing mixed modeling for some may be a new concept, for others is really has been the guiding compass for marketing measurement for some time. Marketing mixed modeling in a nutshell is a technique that brings together and aggregates the cost data associated with your variety of different media and organic presence and tries to build a correlation between investments in certain channels and outcomes, whatever those outcomes happen to be, whether they're conversions, whether it's revenue, whether it's leads in the case of B2B. So marketing mix modeling is a statistical technique that brings all of your data together to try to ascribe weights for how effective each channel might be over a longer period of time. And lastly, we have incrementality. Incrementality is probably the newer section for many marketers, but its importance is becoming known in a variety of very important ways. Incrementality essentially asks the question, which is, how many conversions would we have gotten if we had not had media live or had the content live, for example? Because when you're doing ad targeting, you might be actually investing in a strategy that puts ads in front of customers who would have already purchased. For example, if I'm walking on my way to Burger King to buy a Whopper and I see an ad, well, if I'm already going into the store, I'm probably going to buy the sandwich anyway. In reality, did the ad do too much? Well, in a post-exposure measurement framework, you'd probably say, yes, we attributed that conversion to that ad. But incrementality gives us a series of techniques that we can actually test based on a control and exposed set. How effective was the ad net of what would have happened otherwise? So given that these are the three different pillars that we have for marketing measurement, let's jump into a couple of different ways that we frame the questions and how we at Supermetrics view these problems. So brands really today struggle to achieve this because many that we hear today are stuck in execution mode, right? They're trying to get content out the door. They're trying to put media plans in place. They're trying to connect with customers, do surveys, launch and innovate on new products. It's really difficult to do this because from a holistic strategy standpoint, measurement strategy hasn't always been at the forefront of brands' minds, largely because, well, historically it's been pretty easy. We put content out, we get a fairly good amount of traction associated with that if we've done our research correctly. But given the advancements in regulatory uncertainty and given some of the other trends that we talked about today, it's more than ever important to ensure that you can pull yourself out of execution mode and help ensure that you're focusing on the strategic things that are going to help move your business forward. We find that team silos are increasingly barriers to adoption of holistic measurement strategies, simply because many teams are very happy to measure the effectiveness of their marketing in the ways that they're working on. I'm sure, given the presence of many different SEO teams of all shapes and sizes, we have a variety of metrics that we use to gauge the effectiveness of our content, even in this conference today. Now, we go talk to paid media teams, we go talk to organic social teams, we go and talk to email teams, TV teams. Everyone in the marketing department has a different way of measuring the effectiveness of their content. And so from that perspective, these silos can really be a hindrance in terms of building out a holistic measurement strategy. Limited budgets, of course, can be challenging as well. I don't know of any brands on earth that have unlimited marketing budgets. And so it's always a question of what do we invest in where, and how can we justify the investment in each additional piece that we add to the stack. And lastly, of course, comes brand sophistication and readiness. For the agencies out there, this is one area where I've seen quite a bit of friction where, for example, you might say, hey, we've got everything you need to do in order to build MMMs. We want to help you build incrementality testing, and we can help make sure that post-exposure attribution is all set up and running. But in many cases, the question becomes, how quickly can we get the media out the door, and how quickly can we start delivering results, right? Good brands who are sophisticated have the financial benefits baked into the business model to help reward the different kinds of experimentation muscles that different brands who are successful in this regard ultimately have cultivated. And so when I look at brands based on a maturity perspective, I see the ones who are the furthest along are the ones who have really embraced the consultative nature of marketing measurement and usually employ a variety of specialists outside of their organization to ensure that everything looks good and is based on industry best practices as well. But for us at Supermetrics, when we think about these challenges in light of the industry trends, we of course need to think about how best do we build software to help companies achieve their goals despite what might be happening in the landscape today. So in this section, I'm going to go through a bit of the theoretical pieces behind how we at Supermetrics make product decisions, how we talk about our solutions, and how we ultimately go about crafting the different ways that we consult on how brands can measure the effectiveness of their marketing strategies, regardless of size, shape, or sophistication. So taking a step back, asking the question, why do we actually bother with marketing reporting? For those of you who are familiar with Supermetrics, this is kind of what we're known for. We're one of the largest players, if not the largest, in the marketing reporting space, right? So thinking about dashboards, spreadsheets, databases, data warehouses, we help consolidate your marketing into these areas largely for marketing reporting. But why do we actually do that? And there's a variety of good answers here, right? If you're on the agency side, you might build a dashboard because your client asks for it, right? Or you might need to showcase the fact that your media or your content has actually gone live. If you're on the brand side, you might be building a dashboard so that you can monitor your content performance. You might be building it because your manager or your VP or maybe even your CMO wants to see what's happening on a daily, weekly, or monthly basis. But in reality, I would argue, and we at Supermetrics would argue, that there really should only be one reason to do marketing reporting, and that should be to make better decisions. When we make better decisions, we grow as brands, we delight our customers, and we entertain them with products that ultimately help them in their lives, whether we're selling products to businesses or to consumers. And when organizations embrace data to make better decisions, well, there's a variety of good outcomes that come from that. And so for us at Supermetrics, taking this position is pretty important because it allows us to orient our product decisions around helping our customers make better decisions with the data that they have access to. So what does that look like? Well, it actually turns out that we need to take a closer look at what kinds of decisions marketers actually make. Well, as we've spoken to many marketers at this point, over 17,000 globally within the Supermetrics ranks, we found that marketers are thinking about a lot of different things. They're thinking about products, placement, packaging. They're thinking about ad placement. They're thinking about content. They're thinking about keywords. They're thinking about cost per click. They're thinking about the different search engines, market share. There's a lot of things fundamentally that happen within the marketing organization, not just SEO, but paid media, CRM, everything else that leads to getting marketers to getting customers via marketing to the transaction or to the lead generation event. So with that in mind, we need to take a step back, I guess, again, and simplify this a bit so that we can actually understand what kinds of decisions are marketers making so that we can best not only build tools to help serve those use cases, but provide frameworks that marketers can use for decision making regardless of their context or sophistication. So the one way that we classify decisions is that some decisions are made more often than others, right? And I think everybody in this room can relate to the fact that when you're making decisions, there's a very big difference between decisions that you make on, for example, an hourly basis or decisions that you might make on an annual basis. So, for example, if you're doing annual budget planning, right, that's not something you want to be revisiting certainly every day or every week because, well, the budgets are what they are and we know what pieces we're going to be writing. Maybe we're building content calendars, right? You probably don't want to be updating that daily or hourly, although I know in practice many of these actually are. But those are usually best saved from a quarterly and a monthly perspective. And the analysis that goes into creating those is probably best kept to that same interval as well. In certain cases, though, there are areas where you probably do want to be making decisions on a daily or hourly basis. For example, if you're trying to hop on the latest trend, right? Putting content out that might have gone viral or might be tracking a set of very interesting and particular keywords as well. That's probably something you want to be making decisions on a much closer and more granular basis. Then we move on to a different kind of decision making, which is decision making that requires a different quantity of data. Now, when we think about the kind of data or the quantity of data required to make a decision, I think we can all empathize with the fact that not all decisions require as much data as others, right? There are many decisions that you can actually make with very little data. And when I talk about little data, lots of data, I'm really talking about where does that data actually fit, right? Is it something that you can log directly into something like Google Analytics and get a direct answer to? Is it something that you are going to need to pull a spreadsheet for or download a report from a specific site or a specific tool? Or is it an amount of data that your business has accumulated over a couple of different years or perhaps over several years, perhaps even different business units pulling things together, and actually does require the heft that comes with a data warehouse? For those who may not be aware of what a data warehouse is, think of it as a large data appliance that usually sits in the cloud these days, but for many can still exist on premise in a server in an organized way. And typically requires some specialized skill sets in order to grow and manage that. So with these two different ways of classifying decisions, right? Decisions that are made more frequently than others and decisions that require more data than others, we can actually take a look at start building a set of axes here. Now, with these axes, we can actually take a couple of different areas and focus on how we build out these axes with these different vectors in mind. So frequency of decision-making on the x-axis, volume of data required on the y-axis. And this actually gives us the ability to do something pretty interesting. We can actually build out a set of quadrants to classify different decisions based on the combination of the frequency of decision-making required and the volume of data required. This presents some interesting alternatives. Let's jump in. First off, we have what we're calling optimization decisions. Optimization decisions are decisions that are characterized by having an infrequent use. For example, you're not making these decisions every day, and they typically don't require that much data to be used with them. We then have tactical decisions. Tactical decisions are characterized by having quite a few different decisions made in a very timely manner. So you're usually making these decisions every day, if not at least every week, and they still don't require too much data. On the operational side, these are going to be decisions that you are making, again, probably on a daily basis, but this time require a large amount of data, right? You're probably not going to be able to get away with logging into a single platform because you might require data from multiple different sources. Or you might end up with an amount of data that is so large that it only really fits in a data warehouse. It doesn't really fit in a spreadsheet or multiple spreadsheets. So these operational decisions can be somewhat challenging, especially if you don't have the technical resources for standing up a large data operation. And then lastly, the strategic decisions, right? The ones that we don't make very frequently, but the ones that do require quite a bit of data. These are the important ones that guide the organization. Where are we going to go this year, this quarter, potentially this month as well, and do require that larger amount of analysis. But ultimately, it pays off in terms of providing the guidance and the organizational direction that we need for measuring our content. So the question we then like to ask the teams that we work with is your team using the right tools for the right jobs? Because fundamentally, if we flip back to the quadrant here, you can probably guess that there are different tools and combinations of areas where it might be beneficial to use one set of tools for decision making as opposed to another. Given that this is how we break up the different kinds of decisions, there's a couple of different areas where we can advise on how best to use the right tools for the right jobs, especially given the fact that many different team members are going to need to be making these decisions. Marketing, as is customer acquisition, is always a team sport. And so you're going to need and require different levels of skills and sophistication based on what you're trying to accomplish. Let's talk about what that actually looks like in practice and what we advise at Supermetrics to our clients when they're building out their marketing measurement frameworks. We suggest investing in a set of tools that's great for hands-on marketers, right? Something that marketers can use on a day-to-day basis. They can get data on demand. They can explore data in a cross-channel fashion, and they can bring it straight to the tools that they know how to work with best. Things like Google Sheets, things like Excel, maybe Looker Studio, or even Power BI for many of the analysts out there as well. These should also be able to be deployed rapidly. So you shouldn't necessarily have to work with a data engineering team or get permission from IT to get access to these. You probably already have access to the data sources yourself, but these are decisions that fundamentally need to be made on a timely basis, and you need to get access to that data, even if it doesn't exist in huge quantities. This is one distinct area where tool sets we find happen to be a major accelerator for getting things off the ground quickly and ensuring that the organization is able to best and most, with the most agility, adapt to changing situations. There is, of course, simultaneously a need to store your data centrally in a data warehouse, a data lake. Many brands are investing in this so that they can build up their historical repository and invest in measurement techniques of the future. Again, we talked about MMM being an important way to measure the effectiveness of your campaigns in an omni-channel way using a variety of different data. So building out that historical measurement repository for your organization, whether you're an agency serving a brand or a brand who's in charge of multiple different business units, this fundamentally becomes a differentiator for you against many of your competitors who may not have been around for as long or who may not have as organized data as you do. We fundamentally see the need for these two different kinds of analysis tools, the support for rapidly changing data needs and the support for high volume data use cases. We coined the term then on-demand data and centralized data as really being the pillars of your data collection and measurement strategy. Again, this is how we at Supermetrics see the different worlds of data collection, analysis, and ensuring that marketers, data analysts, data engineers, and leaders have access to the tools that they need in order to make decisions at the cadence and with the variety and volume of data that's going to be influential for them in the organization. So what does this actually look like in practice? I've talked about 4 different use case quadrants and how they apply. Let's actually get into a couple of these now with a few examples. So when we think about optimization decisions, this is where we're going to see incrementality and lift test falling, right? Something you're probably not doing every single day and probably not something that is going to require a huge amount of data. This is going to include things like A/B testing, conversion rate optimization, and for many of the SEO folks, you'll see that this is where you're going to find the SEO use cases living as well in the on-page SEO and keyword research side of things. Again, not necessarily something you're doing every day, but something that's not always going to take a huge amount of data as well, but nonetheless is vital and important for the growth of the organization. We then move over to tactical decisions, right? So for those who are running paid campaigns or for those who are perhaps promoting different areas of content, maybe on search, maybe via white papers or blogs, whatever that happens to be, if you're putting any kind of paid media, whether it's paid search, paid social, whatever it happens to be, you're going to want to monitor those budgets, probably on a day-to-day basis. This is going to include things like data quality alerts to make sure that you don't have dead links running around among your content or any of the ads you might be putting out. Seasonal peak reporting for example, retailers or travel. There are very noticeable peaks and troughs in your business. Ensuring that you have reporting that's up and live during those peaks is going to be super important to ensure that you're putting the right content in front of the right audience at the right time. These collectively make up the on-demand use cases, right? Now, this isn't an exhaustive list, but these are just the ones that I picked out for this event specifically. Now, we'll talk about operational decisions here. Operational decisions, again, require a larger amount of data, but tend to also be followed up on a daily basis. So these would be things like outlier identification, right? So for example, your traffic from an organic post crashes overnight. It could be a variety of different things, right? It could be that one of your inbound links is no longer valid, right? Or it could be, for example, that, God forbid, something has been delisted in many cases or de-indexed. That can happen and is something that you want to know about and understand pretty quickly as well. We have companies using trend identification here as well. So scanning their entire data set for insights across their paid ads, across things like Google Trends and organic social data to identify areas of emerging interest among their customer base. In-channel budget allocations, again, for the campaign element, and monitoring the fatigue of their creatives. If they're finding that creatives are overperforming, that's great, but creative performance is always going to lag over time, and it might be important to swap in a new creative every now and then as well. Bring that all together with strategic decisions that leverage that same large amount of data. They can be used for things like cross-client benchmarking in the event of an agency or a brand with multiple sub-brands, in addition to budget planning, demand forecasting, and cross-channel budget reallocations, many of which are made on the basis of something like an MMM as well. These are some of the centralized data use cases that we have and have identified based on the quadrant here. So for those who are taking notes or taking pictures, this is probably the slide I'd recommend screen capping. What we're going to dive into next actually is a couple of zoomed in use cases that I pulled out specifically in the SEO vein. And these are things that I see customers using all the time. We'll follow that up with a couple of customer examples where we'll show how some of our customers are leveraging the best of their on-demand data stack and their centralized data stack. So let's go ahead and jump into those. So looking at the optimization decision, this is where I see a lot of brands focusing on understanding the incrementality of paid search. For all of the SEOs in the room, and I'll assume it's many, I know that the perpetual question is, to what extent is our organic search being eclipsed by, for example, paid impressions that we're gathering from a search engine, right? And so this is the perpetual question that we see from many organic and paid social teams. One of the ways to try to find this out, right, to try to find out how incremental or how effective marginally is your paid search relative to the investment you're making in organic keyword development, is really to invest in understanding what the incrementality of paid search is. So when we think about building your hypothesis around this, the hypothesis in this example would be perhaps shutting off paid search for a specific set of keywords will not result in a significant drop in conversions, right? If it's leads, if it's e-commerce orders, whatever it happens to be, that can, for example, be your hypothesis. You then design your test, picking the set of keywords that you want to test and establish a control and expose group. Right, you can do this in a variety of different ways, whether it's using geo-targeting or potentially using different audiences for holdouts. There's a couple of different ways you can design your test to ensure that you have a consistent and reliable control and exposure group as well. And really the last step being shut it off and find out. Once you've been able to identify the success criteria and you've been able to actually shut off one of those channels, you can actually start to see the traffic from organic shoot up and, of course, the traffic from paid search go down. And if the savings is there, right, and if you're not significantly impacting the business where conversions are dropping off beyond something that is, acutely measurable, then you've just proven the incrementality of, for example, an organic channel, right? That doesn't necessarily require the support of paid search. Now, I'm not necessarily suggesting you go off and start randomly shooting off your paid search campaigns, especially your top performers, but to take a discipline and methodological approach to incrementality testing to see what the effectiveness of your organic program is relative to paid search by using an optimization decision like incrementality testing. Let's jump into another one. I've identified trend spotting and outlier detection here in both the tactical and the operational decisions here. This is something we have a variety of customers from around the globe using. And one of my favorite examples of this is a large American beverage brand that uses data from Google Trends to identify up and coming areas for research and development, right? So if they, for example, see in Google Trends that, in a certain category, there's something that starts to become interesting, well, that might be an area that we need to start investing in, or at least becoming aware of, right? Now, if you're using a small amount of data for this, then that's something that is probably not going to require a huge amount of sophistication, right? You might be leveraging some of your own data, for example, from Google Analytics or from Google Search Console, or you might be leveraging third-party data, for example, from Google Trends, or maybe a different data source as well. Or you might be synthesizing a variety of different data sources within your organization. For example, could be comments on your Google My Business profile from a variety of different store locations. It could be comments from your organic or paid social posts. It could be the effectiveness of different creatives against different audiences. All of these can be mined and used for developing trend spotting tools that you and the organization can use from a marketing and insights perspective. In addition to, we've even seen from a retailer perspective, a category management perspective. So identifying which products should we put on the shelves based on the trends that we're seeing in our own data or the data that exists outside of our organization. Again, this fits both in the tactical and the operational decision because, well, who doesn't want to stay up on trends on a very recent basis? The next one we have is establishing a baseline for MMM. So for those who are MMM practitioners in the room, this should come as no surprise. For those who are fairly new, I'll walk through it in a bit of detail, but I'm happy to elaborate later on if it's a topic of interest. One of the challenging things about MMM is how to value the effectiveness of channels that don't necessarily have paid spend associated with them, right? That necessarily goes up on a day-to-day, goes up and down on a day-to-day basis. When it comes to establishing a baseline for MMM, what we want to try to understand is what is the incremental effect of the next marketing dollar invested in paid search? Well, in order to do that, we need to establish a baseline. Well, for many brands, especially those who are digital, their baseline is actually largely comprised of traffic that they would have gotten from largely SEO, right? What is the baseline? We turn everything off. All paid search, all paid social, how many conversions are we going to get? And to a large extent, that's going to be the results of hard-earned SEO in many cases. So using SEO inputs over several years can be a great way to assess the value of SEO contribution to your organization for areas where it might look like paid search, paid media, email, for example, might be contributing in a very marginal and incremental way. What we often find is that when you actually look at through a statistical lens, through MMM, you actually find, well, actually many of these conversions might have happened anyway, given the fact that the SEO presence happens to be so strong. So figuring out the best way to incorporate this into your MMM is going to vary on a business by business case, whether you're doing lead gen, whether you're doing e-commerce or striking for conversions. There's a couple of different ways to get this into your measurement stack. But nonetheless, the baseline that you have for MMM becomes super important and is going to require a large amount of data and likely working with a variety of different marketing stakeholders from within your organization as well. And lastly, of course, is securing your historical data. I don't think I need to go into too much detail about this, especially when you either know or come to find out that Google Analytics 4 and Google Search Console, well, they don't store your data perpetually. Gone are the days where Google is signing up to store your Google Analytics data from the inception of your first GA property in 2005. That's just not happening anymore. GA4 stores your data for 14 months and then deletes it permanently. Same thing with Search Console, but they'd hold on to it for 18 months. For you as an organization, especially if you're trying to establish a baseline for what is normal, and how you can effectively measure the other incremental components of your business, this is super important data, right? So I can't think of a reason not to start storing this data, especially because it gives you the benchmark that you can use to assess your strategy and any of the tactics you might be using in your business today. So those are some of the 4 main use cases that I've seen our customers implement with SEO and where they fit on the quadrants and the tools then associated with those. But let's now just talk about a couple of specific customers where I'll speak about how they're using our tools and some of the different ways that they have applied this in practice. So the first example comes from Accenture Interactive. Of course, Accenture being one of the largest, if not the largest consultancy in the world, of course, using Supermetrics for them has resulted in a pretty exciting advent where you can see today the media team at Accenture originally chose Supermetrics to help them with budget pacing and conversion tracking across a variety of different paid channels. And this is all actually despite the fact that they really made significant investments in centralized data infrastructure. But fundamentally, when it came to the tactical and the tactical and the operational decisions, the centralized data infrastructure just wasn't moving fast enough to cater for their needs. So they stood up a set of Google Sheets reports using Supermetrics to help ensure that they had the speed and agility to react to things on a much quicker basis. So while storing historical client data across their different storage mechanisms and leveraging their internal data teams to do so, that freed up their time to focus more on the market differentiating services that they were providing with their data science and data engineering resources. On the meanwhile, those who are producing content, those who are putting digital media out into the space are then able to save a significant amount of time and ensure that they have the data they need on a daily basis without necessarily having to get bottlenecked by an internal IT department. So really excited about what we've been able to do with Accenture in this particular case, taking a on-demand approach and layering it on top of a centralized data strategy as well. Then jumping over to our next case over here in the Nordics, Dentsu Norway. I've worked with Jarl in a couple of different occasions, and Dentsu Norway has been a customer of Supermetrics for a couple of years now. For them, they knew that they really wanted to invest in their strategic use cases. And so for them, the best option was to centralize their historical data inside of BigQuery. Now, of course, Dentsu works with a number of large regional and global clients. And for them, this really became a differentiator. They were one of the first Dentsu branches in region to be able to offer high volume data use cases such as MMM to their clients. And they really ended up being seen as a leader within the Dentsu network. So much so that now Dentsu Sweden and Denmark have now actually come on and migrated to similar technology with Supermetrics as well. I know Dentsu is one of the sponsors of this event here at SEO Square. So really excited to talk about our collaboration here. You can see Jarl's quote in the bottom right here that, for many, building the connections by themselves to these different APIs and gathering all of this data would have been a pretty tremendous amount of work for them and the team, and more importantly, would have distracted them from the meaningful client work that ultimately is going on and the stuff that is really going to make a difference for them at the end of the day. So 2 of my favorite examples for the different ways that centralized and on-demand data can complement the different ways that use cases are built out inside of a media measurement framework. I recognize these are both agency use cases, but all the same applies for brands, right? And of course, we work with at Supermetrics about half brands, half agencies directly, many of whom are using our tools in exactly the same way. So these patterns apply really whether you're the agency implementing this on behalf of your brands or a brand who's adopting these strategies for your own internal measurement purposes. But what ultimately we want to help make sure our customers are thinking about and how we can best position our tools and the way that we think and the way that our products are used is essentially to ensure that your media team, your content team, your production team gets the agility that they crave. The data team gets the power that they require from their sophisticated set of tools used by data scientists, data engineers, and data analysts, and ultimately gives your brand the unity that it deserves, a unified marketing strategy and measurement strategy across the footprint of your brand assets. So if we're able to do this and make sure that we're keeping all of these things in mind while we're putting our products in front of our customers, while we're building things out and looking 2-3 years down the line for what best we can do to put in front of our customers, we're going to be moving in the right direction ultimately. So happy to have shared this framework with you, and hopefully this gives you a couple of ideas for how best to use data to power your next step and what your data collection and measurement strategy can look like going forward. But real practically, okay, Evan, that's great. We talked about centralized, on demand. What does that actually look like for me, and how can I get started? This is the part where I'll go through the 30, 60, 90 of what we've seen brands, both large and small, and agencies on their behalf actually take as concrete actions and next steps for how to get started. Number one, in your first 30 days, if you decide to really move forward with this, this is really where you start with the on-demand set of tools. This is kind of the boring part around getting access to all the data sources, making sure that you have the MVP reporting up and covered. You know exactly what your optimization and tactical decisions are going to be. And maybe you've even done wireframes for dashboards or have those really even up and running as well. And you're defining your core media KPIs and your taxonomy, whether it's media taxonomy, whether it's content taxonomy, whatever that happens to be. All of that happens within the first 30 days. That then sets you up for the next 30 days so that you can meet your 60-day benchmark. In 60 days, you want to make sure that you're then leveraging the centralized set of tools. Once you have access to all the data, you can decide what kind of data you need, backfill it into your data lake or data warehouse that you need, build out your operational and strategic decisions to ensure that your use cases and the dashboards and reports that you build are enabling you and your team to make those decisions that you need, and then simultaneously lay the foundation for AI and ML. I told you we'd come back to AI here at this point. Then in the last 90 days, that's where you, number one, have the lights on because you have your minimum viable product or your MVP reporting. You have backfilled your historical data. You've defined your requirements and hopefully built out some basic pieces of your optimization and tactical and your operational and strategic decisions. And then you can free up the data and engineering team's time to focus on those three areas that we identified at the very beginning of the presentation: MMM, incrementality studies, and multi-touch attribution, in addition to then having that data be available for AI and machine learning use cases in production. This is what we see when companies truly invest in a data-driven and on-demand centralized strategy, and how best it can be laid out, again, by a brand itself, assuming that the brand is well equipped and has the wherewithal to accomplish this, or led by an agency who wants to help ensure that many of these things are taken care of. Of course, I'll say, if you're talking about a large global brand with billions in ad spend, this maybe takes more than 90 days, right? But for many either regional brands, we've certainly seen this in large regional brands. We've seen agencies do this on behalf of multiple brands at the same time. This can be a really good blueprint for laying the foundation for an on-demand and centralized data strategy and a comprehensive measurement plan that is ultimately robust to many of the different headwinds that we identified early on in the presentation. And if this is something that you're interested in, I'd love for you to come on the journey with us for the Supermetrics Marketing Intelligence Show. This is the podcast that we host here at Supermetrics. I'm not the exclusive host, but I do host many of the episodes. And you'll actually find reference to the triad, the three different areas of marketing measurement that we spoke about earlier today. Michael Kaminsky, who is the co-founder and co-CEO of Recast, he and I did an episode on exactly this. Olivia Corey is an expert on incrementality testing, and Andrew Cavato, you can see based on the number of companies that he's worked with in the advertising space, really knows marketing attribution all the way around. He's actually the one that I took the post-exposure measurement or post-exposure attribution phrase from. So he's a super smart guy in the space. Highly recommend following all of these folks. And of course, when you subscribe to the podcast, you'll get access to all of this content in addition to whatever we have coming out sooner or later after this. I know of a couple of additional speakers who are going to be added to this lineup who have even more to say about this. So would love to see you come and join the podcast with us if this kind of content is something that you enjoy as well. But with that, I think we can go ahead and wrap up on the slides side of things. I see that we've got some questions that have percolated in. And I see that from a timing perspective, we're looking pretty good. So I think I'll go ahead and jump in and answer a couple of questions. I've got the camera here and the screen down here. So I'm just going to look down here when I take a look at some of these questions here. Yeah, so top voted question here. So thanks, Max. Can you define MMM? So MMM is marketing mix modeling, or for some, media mix modeling. So we've got a lot of content at Supermetrics on MMM, the benefits, how to set it up, and how exactly it as a tool can be used as a comprehensive measurement framework for you and your brand. In fact, I'd say that Olivia Corey, in fact, that podcast episode that I referred to with her, we spoke pretty extensively about MMM and what some guidelines are for how best it can be applied, in addition to Michael Kaminsky as well. So if you want some more information on what MMM is, how it can be applicable for your business, and what some of the best ways to get it set up are, we have blog posts and we have some other podcasts as well that you can take a look at as well. Media mix modeling, it's the statistical measurement framework that you can use to assess the effectiveness of your ads and your digital footprint on your overall business. Let's jump to the next question from Kanil. So I'll go ahead and answer this one here. So from Kanil, as site owners transition to GA4, there are challenges with historical data from earlier GA versions. Could you provide any advice on maintaining a single reliable data source across different teams? Yeah, so this one's tricky. We've had a number of customers at Supermetrics have this exact challenge, and I think the best answer that I can give here is that knowing that it is a challenge is probably part of it, and setting that expectation from an organizational perspective is actually super important, because if your CMO expects to be able to compare numbers from this year and last year between GA and GA4, that's going to be pretty tough, because GA and GA4 are fundamentally different tools. GA is based on sessions and GA4 is based on events. And fundamentally, that just ultimately revolves, that just results in a completely different set of data. So really part of it is ensuring that you have the organizational flexibility to change the tools that you use to report on, and you essentially ensure that you are effectively communicating that to your stakeholders internally. I would argue that for consistency's sake, if your business strategy is dependent on the way that a single tool measures sessions or events or something like that, it means that your measurement strategy is probably too dependent on a single tool. And rather, we should probably try to abstract away the different tools that might be measuring something and get closer to what is the actual business impact associated with that. With that said, we do have a variety of customers who are using a couple of different tools from Supermetrics in order to try to, as best as possible, blend together the data from their historical Google Analytics and GA4 data so that they do have a somewhat contiguous timeline as well. We've recently launched some functionality around data blending that does exactly this. So if that is something that you're interested in, Supermetrics does, of course, have some solutions around that. Would be more than happy to put you in touch with someone from our team who might be able to explain what that looks like at a specific level as well. So thanks for the question, Kanil.
Thank you very much, Evan. I think that was the last question because we are just on time. Can they contact you directly on LinkedIn to ask their question?
Yes, certainly. Yeah, and
Okay,
I think for
perfect.
the questions here as well, I'm more than happy to address these in whichever forum makes the most sense, whether it's publicly or privately. But yeah, thanks, Antoine.
That's perfect. So thank you very much for this conference and your expertise on this topic. Thanks to all participants for taking part. We hope you have enjoyed this conference. We're going to take a 10-minute break before starting the next and last conference of the SEO Square, presented by Gary White. The conference will be 8 strange things on website that still seem to get neglected. You will receive an email from Livestorm in a few minutes to access it. If you have any problems joining the conference, you can contact us via support on the SEO Square website, and we look forward to seeing you. Cheers.